Well, welcome everybody to the Mary Hyatt Show. I, of course, am your show host, and I could not be more excited to be with you guys today to discuss how to courageously embrace vulnerability. Vulnerability to me is a topic that a lot of people are throwing around, a lot of people are talking about it, and there's still this resistance to vulnerability. There's still this sort of elusiveness of what is it? How do I begin to be vulnerable? Why do I need to become vulnerable? Isn't that weakness? And so we're going to dive into all of that on today's show. But maybe this is your first time tuning in. Maybe you have never seen my face or met me before. So it is great to meet you. And as always, I encourage you to comment below in the comments so we can create this conversation on the Facebook Live show so I can talk directly with you. But I am a life coach, a body love advocate, and a presidential diamond with doTERRA essential oils. And so my passion is to really help women wake up, find their voice, and become fully alive. So every week on the show, we're talking about body positivity. We're talking about what it looks like to embrace the body that you have today and truly love it and find peace around food, find peace around the mirror, and explore topics like vulnerability, authenticity, showing up and being seen, and exploring emotions and feelings and all that stuff that sometimes feels a little bit scary to get into. So without further ado, let's start the show. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive straight into today's topic because we have a lot to cover. Like I said, I feel like this could be an entire series, and so I want to make sure that we're getting into the good stuff right from the get-go. But what I kind of want to talk about today, I've kind of structured it a little bit differently than I typically do. A lot of times I'm really off the cuff, but today I really thought through, like, what do you need to know about vulnerability? And so I'm kind of breaking it down into three key fundamentals because I feel like it's so important to understand the fundamentals of vulnerability, why it's so important. Fundamental 2 is why we resist it. And lastly, how do we begin to embrace it? So let's start with the first key fundamental. Why is it so important? Why are we talking about vulnerability today? Why am I going to encourage you to step into more vulnerability? And if we slow it down and we think about vulnerability, vulnerability really is the birthplace of connection, of belonging, and ultimately of intimacy. And it allows us to be in an actual relationship with other people in a way that feels really real and authentic. And if you think about some of your friendships maybe or your acquaintances, when there's a lack of vulnerability, or even in your marriage or your partnership, there's a lack of connection when there's a lack of vulnerability. It's like everything's kind of surface, everything's sort of up here, everything is it's not deep, it's not intimate, it's not connected. And so it feels like we're at arm's length from other people. And yeah, we're maybe living life together, maybe we're doing stuff, we're in routine with other people, but it's like that heart connection is missing. And the only way to truly get that heart connection where you feel truly seen, truly known, truly loved is by the path of vulnerability. And when we are vulnerable, like when we can allow ourselves to just be ourselves and voice what we want to voice and stay in alignment with our truth, it's like then the pressure comes off. Then we actually get to just be ourselves and relax a little bit. And I love, and I'll be quoting Brene Brown like through this entire show today because she really is my vulnerability hero. But I love how she puts it. She says, vulnerability makes people lean in. So think about that for a second. It really does. It makes people lean in. So I mentioned this on Instagram, and I'm going to share a story of my vulnerability moment this past week. So I haven't actually even rehearsed this, so I'm just trying to gauge how much I'm going to share in real time. So this past week I have been in a relationship with my boyfriend for coming up on 2 years, which is crazy. And through a series of a lot of different events recently, I have gotten really, really scared about moving into the next phase of our relationship, which is more serious and more together, and ultimately opening myself up to receive love. I've recently started going back to therapy and started to explore a bunch of different ways in which I resist love. You guys know me probably well enough from watching the show and following me, or know me in real life, that I work on this stuff. I mean, I'm a life coach. I read all these books about being authentic and being vulnerable and allowing ourselves to be seen. And yet the human part of me, it's I still have to learn this and go through this. And back in middle school and high school for me, when I was about 13 or 14, I had some pretty traumatic experiences with other boys in my grade. And it left me in a state of kind of little T trauma and abandonment. I have a lot of fear around being abandoned. And I was married before for 10 years, got divorced, and now I'm in this relationship. I'll call it a new relationship. And have just had kind of a lot of this old wound, old little T trauma resurface as I've been going through therapy, and this fear of abandonment, this fear of really fully opening myself up to love and trusting that it will stay, trusting that it will be here, trusting that I am enough, trusting that I am lovable, trusting that love is here for me. And so this week, got this trigger. I had this trigger of this fear that came up. And I was sitting with my boyfriend, and there was this moment of I've been struggling. I have been struggling for a little while, and I've been afraid to tell him because it's not even about him at all. It's my own stuff, and I've been afraid of how he might receive that, or what he might think of me, or maybe his opinion will change of me, or maybe he'll fall out of love with me if I share kind of this deep, dark stuff that I've been really struggling with. And so we were sitting on the couch, and it took me probably 30 minutes to get up the courage to finally say, I need to talk to you about some things that are triggering me. And he's super receptive, let's go, great, I'm here, I want to listen. And it was I couldn't speak. I literally felt there was this ball inside of my throat, and I could not get it out. And I just started crying, and I was so unbelievably terrified to share what I thought was in my brain probably going to be a deal breaker. This fear that I had, this experience from a long time ago that I had. And it was so scary. I was oh my God, if he knows this about me, if I share this with him, he's going to leave. It was triggering all this abandonment stuff. And so I finally said, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'll just talk to my therapist about it. I'm fine. And he was one of our rules in our relationship is we don't run. And so he said, we don't do that. We don't run. And I'm I don't want to share this. I don't want to share this. And finally, I was either I bury this, either I numb this, either I stuff this, or I let him see me and open myself up to receive this love. And it was truly one of the most courageous experiences that I have had in a long time, where I had to truly step forward in vulnerability and share some of this stuff with him. And it was I was shaking. I would start sentences and not finish them. I went into actually a lot of panic. I had kind of a panic attack through talking about it. Some stuff, a lot of stuff is going on. And I said, I just want to have one of those relationships where we are so connected, and we just grow in deeper love with each other throughout the years. And we just have one of those relationships that people go, my God, how have you been doing it? And he looked at me and he said, this is where it begins. He goes, in order to have one of those relationships, it starts here. And I just thought, man, this man is amazing and like so incredibly wise. But it was so much truth in that moment of like, we can't have that kind of amazing relationship if I don't allow him to see me, if I don't step forward in vulnerability. And so it's really like a powerful moment. There's all kinds of ways we can be vulnerable. That's just one way that I'm sharing with you. But what's amazing is like, now think about how you feel about me. Do you feel closer to me by me sharing that story? Do you feel like all of a sudden I'm a human being and not somebody who's just talking on this show? All of a sudden, do you feel like, okay, wow, like she just shared something with her heart and I feel like I have some of those same fears or I have some of those same struggles. You know, when we are vulnerable, like my vulnerability with my boyfriend, but then my vulnerability right now to share with you guys about that, it like breaks those walls down and it creates a point of human connection. Like we're just all in this, like big babies, like trying to figure it out. Scared that we're going to be rejected, scared that we're not going to be loved. And that gets really wonky in a lot of different areas. So if you guys feel more connected to me, or maybe just even like a deeper understanding of like, okay, like Mary's a real person, I want you guys to either give me some hearts, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, or just comment below and say, yeah, girl, I feel ya. Yeah, girl, I feel ya. Because that's what vulnerability does. It connects us. And without vulnerability, all the other people in our lives are just others, are just outside of ourselves, are out here. And out here, and thank you guys for your hearts and your thumbs up. When people are out here, then we start judging people. Then we start putting expectations on behavior of people. We are not in true relationship with other people when we aren't showing up as our true selves. It's like there's this barrier. There's this mask that we are wearing. And that is why we often feel a deep sense of loneliness. Like the work that I do with my coaching, my clients are always telling me that they're lonely, that they want better friendships, that they want a better relationship with their person. And, we might be all connected on social media, but the reality is we can't trick our hearts into real connection. We never feel truly known when it's just liking things on social media or commenting on Instagram. So we exist in this loneliness, this perpetual loneliness. And so when we're not vulnerable, it keeps us at arm's length from other people and it creates loneliness. And so if you think about kind of the opposite of vulnerability, so vulnerability is allowing our true selves to be seen, kind of having that exposure. The opposite of vulnerability is pretending. It's hiding. It's like pretending everything is perfect. It's like, I'm great, I'm fine, how are you? Oh my gosh, love that. Hey girl, but it's never really like in that connection. It's pretending we have it all together. It is looking like we're always happy. We talked about social media on the show last week. And so it's really amazing what happens. We have to create this chameleon. It's like the chameleon syndrome where we kind of shape shift to be whatever I think you want me to be, but you never really know me. And therefore I never feel truly known. And therefore I don't belong anywhere. If you can't know me, then I'm never known. I can't belong. And so we end up being lonely. And so without vulnerability, we feel separated. There is a separation between me and there's a separation between you. It puts a fence between us. It feels shallow. It feels awkward. And the reality is our hearts are longing for more. Like, can I get an amen? If you feel like you are longing for deeper relationships, whether that's in your marriage, your partnership, your friendships, relationships with your kids, like even acquaintances, will you type in a number 1 below in the comments? Just type in a number 1. If you are desiring deeper relationships on some level, just type in a number 1. You don't even have to get into more information than that. But if we are truly going to have fulfilling relationships of any kind, fulfilling relationships, ones where we feel free, ones where we feel at peace, where we feel safe, where there is joy, where there is a sense of playfulness, vulnerability is required. There is simply no way around it. Like it's required for that. vulnerability is speaking and standing in your truth. Vulnerability is the courage to be yourself fully. Amy, Juanita, you guys say number one, and Charlene, you said this is what you propelled me to call you last week. It helps to make others not feel alone. We're all in it together and not so different from each other. Oh my gosh, Charlene, you sent me the most beautiful message last week, just encouraging me and saying how you valued my work. And that, I played it for my boyfriend. I was like, you've got to listen to this message. And I was like weeping. It was so powerful. Thank you for that. And that's what happens when we step out to connect. It's really, really amazing. And so I love this quote by Stephen Russell. And he says, vulnerability is the only authentic state. Being vulnerable means being open for wounding, but also for pleasure. Being open to the wounds of life means also being open to the bounty and beauty. Don't mask or deny your vulnerability. It is your greatest asset. Be vulnerable, quake and shake in your boots with it. The new goodness that is coming to you in the form of people, situations, and things can only come to you when you are vulnerable, i.e. open. Don't you just love that? Oh, I just feel like that's such a powerful reminder. Like when you enter into a state of vulnerability, what comes from it is really powerful. And it's the only way to get what our hearts truly want, which is to be known and to belong and to be loved. Vulnerability is going to help with that. So that first fundamental, the key fundamental there is, okay, why is this important? Because it really connects us. It helps us have a sense of belonging, and it is the birthplace of intimacy. Now let's take a look at the second fundamental of vulnerability, to understanding it, which is why we resist it. Why do we resist vulnerability? And the first reason that we resist vulnerability is because it feels like exposure. Can I get an amen? Like, can I get a freaking amen? It feels like exposure. Like, when you step up to share something vulnerable with somebody, it feels like being naked. It feels like being seen, and you're just like stark naked in a room. Everybody is seeing you in your birthday suit. And it's like somebody all of a sudden is able to see into your entire inner world. There's no hiding. There's no pretending. There's no bullshitting. It's like, oh my gosh, here I am fully exposed. It is scary. Like the reason we resist vulnerability is because it feels like exposure. And so many of us try to avoid being exposed. And if you think about it, and we talk about vulnerability, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, like vulnerability creates connection, and we want to have more connection. We want to be less lonely. We want to have better relationships with our people. But that exposure often trumps that feeling of wanting that belonging. And so we set up our protection in so many different ways. We start protecting our heart. We start protecting the ways in which we connect with people so that we don't feel exposed. And we start spending our days basically covering up and hiding who we truly are because we want to not feel exposed. So that really is the first reason that we begin to resist vulnerability. Now, the second reason we resist vulnerability is because it risks rejection. Unfortunately, there is no way around this. I'm sorry to tell you. I'll talk a little bit about ways later about how we're going to begin to embrace vulnerability in some smarter ways so you aren't rejected as much. But anytime that we step out, if you think about the whole concept of love, when we step out and we allow ourselves to be open to love, there is a chance we will get our heart broken. We cannot go through life avoiding pain. We just can't. We cannot go through life without being rejected. Rejection is a part of life. It happens all the time. Now, what's interesting is even though we can't avoid rejection, we can choose how we interpret it. So oftentimes if we're rejected, so if let's say you go out on a limb and you say you want to share something with somebody and it is just not met with the response that you want, you have the ability to choose how you take that information in, how you receive it, how you interpret it, the meaning that you give the rejection determines how you're going to feel about the rejection. So even though part of life is being rejected, how we interpret that makes all the difference. Like I always say, like, not my monkeys, not my circus, or that's their stuff, not mine. My lovability is not open for negotiation, so I can release that. Like, that's really powerful when we start beginning to recognize that rejection doesn't mean we are somebody who is nothing or not good enough or a horrible person or we should never open our mouths again or whatever. No, it just means it's their stuff that's getting triggered by us living in our truth. And so it's not ours. But that risk of rejection is real. So I want to just say that. Like, it's scary. It's real. And what happens if somebody says something hurtful to us as a response? What happens if it's not received well? What happens if we ask somebody for help and they say no? What if we share a fear and our partner makes light of it? What if we voice our opinion and then somebody kind of comes in and bullies us and says, oh, that's stupid. What are you thinking? Why are you doing that? So there is a real risk of judgment. And we put our walls up. Again, it makes us want to protect. And then we never get to experience that true love and belonging. So the invitation is to shift the way we're interpreting that rejection. It doesn't have to hurt us as deeply if we don't allow it to. We get to determine what that quote unquote rejection means. Okay, so then the kind of last reason that we begin to resist this vulnerability is because it's seen as emotional weakness. Now, I can't remember who said it at the beginning of the show, but you were like, I don't allow myself to be vulnerable very often. So is it because you might see vulnerability as weakness? This is super, super common. So if this is you, if you have traditionally seen vulnerability as weakness, type in a number 2 in the comments below. Just type in a number 2 if you've traditionally seen this as weakness. Because most of us believe that having any emotions, showing emotion, showing feelings, for a woman is weakness. And so vulnerability kind of falls into that camp and into that category with things that make us weak. If I cry, if I share that I'm hurt, if I share that I'm angry, that's weakness. Because we've been taught, from early age for little kids, suck it up, dry it up, man up. We've kind of been taught that having any of these emotions is considered weakness, and we need to sort of muster up the energy to just sort of get over it. And in reality, it to me is such a source of strength. Like the amount of courage and bravery that is required to be vulnerable. To me, like when I see somebody step out in vulnerability now, it's like, holy cow, that is strong. Yeah, Charlene, you said our fear of being seen as needed. Totally. Yeah. Or needy, being needy. Yeah, that could be a huge fear. So let's kind of think about what vulnerability looks like in practical terms. So vulnerability could be saying no. So if somebody asks you to do something, you just say no. Vulnerability could be saying that, hey, I want to go here for dinner, versus saying like, oh, I'm fine, it doesn't matter, like we can go everywhere you want to go. It could be letting somebody hear your fears. Vulnerability could be initiating sex. Vulnerability could be sharing an opinion. Vulnerability could be showing up in a bathing suit at the beach to play with your kids after you've had several children and you think your body isn't what it should be. It could be telling your friend that they have hurt your feelings. Vulnerability could be asking for help. Vulnerability could be letting somebody in to love you. Vulnerability could be saying out loud that you still want to try to have children after 2 miscarriages. Vulnerability could be quitting your job. Vulnerability could be showing up at a PTA meeting when the week before all the ladies were gossiping about you. And y'all, none of these are weakness. If you think about all of these examples, and there's so many more that we could talk about, those moments where we show up, that is unbelievably brave, courageous, strong, powerful. It is anything but weak. Anything but weak. To me, it is the bravest thing that we can do in this world, is to show up in our vulnerability. And it often feels like that. It often feels like the scariest thing, the bravest thing that we can do. But once you step into that vulnerability, like the other night when I shared with Bentley what was going on inside of me, it was like, I'm kind of a badass. Like, wow, like I really did step forward in that and shared something that was super, super scary. And that takes guts. That takes guts to do that, where I could have just stuffed it, hid it, pretended it wasn't there, numbed it out, coped, whatever. No, like I did the hard thing. I risked the rejection. I risked the exposure for a deeper kind of connection. And so the cool thing about vulnerability is that when we practice it, we actually take our power back. When we don't voice it, when we don't step into it, when we try to fake it, try to like have it all together, it actually has control over us. And that makes us very fragile and very susceptible to being under real hurt and attack. That is weakness. Vulnerability is strength. The weakness is when we try to hold it all together and don't let any of the plates fall and gotta just, and it's like, it can all crash down. It's false. It's a false sense of security. Vulnerability gives us our power back because we are the ones choosing how we are sharing and being in alignment with our true selves. And when we are in alignment with who we truly are, where we can voice our opinion, what matters to us, ask for help, that is us in our power. That is us in our strength, because it's who we are. There's nothing more strong than being who we are. Okay, so we talked about why it's so important, why we resist it, but I want to talk about the third fundamental of vulnerability, which is learning how to embrace it. Okay, so we know why we should do it, what's going to come up, those fears that are going to come up, acknowledge those. Now, how do we actually step into it? So to me, the first thing that we can do is, the first way is to know who it is safe to share with. This is really, really important because there are degrees of vulnerability, all right? You won't always want to be vulnerable with everyone in the same way. So, for example, what I share on social media, like if you follow me on Instagram, you will see that in my posts, I am quite vulnerable. I talk about some struggles. I talk about dealing with this. I talked quite a bit about my divorce as I was going through it. But it is vulnerability light, I should say. Okay, so it's not all the juicy details. It's not all the ins and outs. It's pretty broad, but it is vulnerable. But it's pretty broad. So it's completely different than what I'm going to share with my close girlfriends, for example. So if I was going through a situation, what I share on social media and then what I say when I'm having a drink with my girlfriends, it's going to be quite different. I'm going to give them more because I trust them, because we've established that level of trust. I know that there is this vault, that they aren't going to go off and talk about it to somebody else. They truly want what's best for me. So I can trust them. I know that they will challenge me. We're living in life together. So we're in that deeper relationship. So what I share with them is a deeper level of vulnerability. And then what I share with them isn't even going to be as deep as what I share with Bentley. Bentley, because of our relationship, he's going to get the deepest parts of that vulnerability. And I wouldn't share all of that with my girlfriends, or especially not on social media. So sometimes we think vulnerability is just like sharing everything. It's like this purge, this sort of emotional vomit, like, this is really hard and you're doing all this stuff and we just kind of get it all out. That's not vulnerability. Anytime that we are using it to manipulate that can be a clear indicator that that's not true vulnerability. And so it's important to understand these levels of vulnerability and realize that we don't owe it to everybody to be vulnerable with all of those people. And so Brene Brown, she says, vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experience with people who have earned the right to hear them. So good. We have to know that the person that we're sharing with is safe. And it's really important that we don't overshare with people who haven't been tested, who we haven't seen can really like hold the space for us to talk, to share. And so there's going to be these different levels. And the times when I am the most vulnerable are times in the quiet, in the dark, with probably one other person. So if I'm meeting you for the first time, I might tease out a little bit of vulnerability to see how you can handle it. Because if you're resistant to your own vulnerability, you're not going to be a safe person to share with. And that's why it's important for us to be vulnerable so that we can also hold the space for others to be vulnerable as well. But if we are sharing, for example, to get our needs met, or to guilt trip somebody into doing something that we want, like manipulate them with our emotions. So we're like sharing all this stuff, but really we have an ulterior motive. That's not vulnerability. Ultimately, vulnerability comes from a place of integrity. It's our truth. It's not our fear. Vulnerability is not our fear. It's our truth. Now, the truth can be that we're fearing certain things, but it's not this oversharing that's manipulating out of our fear. It has healthy boundaries. And so we need to be really clear when we're looking at how to embrace vulnerability that we know who it is safe to share with and have those sort of degrees. And that's going to lessen our risk of rejection. When we kind of like go out there and share like emotional dump on social media, we're probably going to experience a higher rate of rejection than if we're sharing with somebody that we love, trust, and that's basically like, got the seal of approval that they want our best, that they're there to listen and they can hold the space. And those people are going to be very few and far between. It's not a huge group of people. So be mindful of that. Now, the second way to begin to embrace vulnerability is to baby step your way in. And so I like this. So baby step your way in. So oftentimes we resist this vulnerability because we think we have to kind of like share our deepest, darkest, like most painful trauma experiences with everybody. Not true. Don't worry, you don't have to do that. It's about baby stepping your way. So it may be like, let's say your friend, a new friend, calls you and says, hey girl, like let's go out for drinks this week, or hey, would you be willing to help me on the school, fundraiser or whatever. A baby step of vulnerability could be something like, thank you so much for asking me, but we're gonna have to reschedule and let's do it for another time because I am wiped out from this week. That's super vulnerable because our protective self is like, yeah, sure, let's do it, or yeah, I can help with that. But being willing to kind of be honest with where you're at, like I'm too tired, or I'm overcommitted as it is, or I need to really focus on some self-care. Like we're baby stepping our way into vulnerability to kind of observe the response that we're getting from other people. So baby step your way in. It could be starting with the little things like having a preference. So if somebody asks your opinion, having a preference. Where do you want to go to eat today? Or what do you think? Actually responding from a place of truth. That's really vulnerable, but that's kind of a baby step of vulnerability. It could be saying no. It could be just sort of tiptoeing your way in lightly when we're thinking about vulnerability. Lightly tiptoeing your way in. Not these big overshares, the deepest, darkest things of your heart, but just kind of being willing to use your voice. Being able to have some boundaries. This is tiptoeing your way in, or saying like, if somebody asks you how you're doing, just giving them an actual honest answer. That's a way to tiptoe into vulnerability. And it gives people permission to be honest as well. When you're honest with where you're at, it gives people permission to be where they're at. Okay, so the third way to embrace your vulnerability is to remember that your lovability isn't on the line. This is a big one, and I need like a lot of hearts for this because I think this is really, really powerful. So give me some hearts as I'm talking about this, because when you believe on a deep level that your lovability is not on the line, and you can remember that in moments of vulnerability, it gives you the permission to share without thinking that you're going to be too much or not enough. Like, how you receive my vulnerability has no bearing on whether I am lovable or not. Whatever you try to attach to me, or the shame or the rejection, has no bearing. Like, my lovability is not open to negotiation. So one of the things when I'm starting to embrace vulnerability that I start thinking to myself is, what would I say if I believed that I was lovable no matter what? Like in this moment where I have something to say, but I'm scared to say it. When I'm scared to open my mouth and voice something, a fear, a frustration, a hurt, a desire, a want. When we're about to voice in vulnerability something that's true to ourselves, allowing ourselves to be seen. What if we could ask ourselves, what if I believe that I am lovable no matter what? Wow, if I believed that I was lovable no matter what, then I could feel the freedom to share this, and your response doesn't have any bearing on my lovability. What would I do if I believed that I couldn't fail? These are really powerful questions that open you up to more vulnerability, to embrace it more, so that you're not gauging your worthiness based on other people's reactions or their fear of judgment. Like, a lot of times we don't do or say what we want to do or say because we are afraid that somebody won't accept us, or they'll judge us like, well, who does she think she is? Or, oh my God, can you believe that Mary said no to that? Or, yeah, I tried to ask Mary out for whatever, but she was too tired. Or, whatever it is. It's like, once we realize I don't have to gauge my worthiness based on your reaction, then I'm freed up to be myself. That is really powerful. And so then we can not trust that fear, and we can access our courage. And courage, of course, is like stepping forward in the face of fear. But fear doesn't get a vote. The fear that I won't be loved, I won't be accepted, I'll be judged, I will be not invited to the next gathering, or that I'm not cool enough, or skinny enough, or pretty enough, or smart enough, or rich enough, or successful enough. Nope. Because I know that true intimacy and belonging can only happen if I show up as myself. So the more I think I have to fake it, the more I think that I have to pretend, the more I have to think I gotta be whoever you want me to be, we'll never truly connect. And so it's really important to remember that your lovability isn't on the line. And the quicker that you can allow yourself to truly be you, the quicker you're going to basically eliminate those fake people out of your life and start calling in the people that you can have true connection with. It's amazing what happens when you start being vulnerable. You do. The people that aren't able to be vulnerable, they kind of move out of your life. And the people who are more willing to go there, you'll find each other. And you'll actually be able to have those intimate relationships. Okay, so the fourth and final way to embrace vulnerability is to celebrate your vulnerability. I wish you guys could have seen me sing that. I was like really into that moment. But like, celebrate your vulnerability. Guys, what you're doing is brave. This is no small thing. We have been taught how to stuff and numb and cope and avoid. So stepping into vulnerability needs a little, what's the word? I don't know. You help me out, guys. Give me the comments. Brain, hello. Anyways, reinforce. There it is. To reinforce the good stuff. To reinforce the fact that like we're doing the right thing. We're moving towards more belonging. We're moving towards more intimacy, more connection, deeper, more fulfilling relationships. So when we stumble awkwardly in our vulnerability, when we test out the waters, when we baby step in, or maybe we have a big share, that we celebrate that, because it's really common after you share something to have the vulnerability hangover. Anybody know what I'm talking about? If you know what I'm talking about, vulnerability hangover, type in a number 3 below in the comments. Type in a number 3 if you've ever experienced a vulnerability hangover, where you wake up the next day and you go, oh my God, I shared too much. Or like, I know I just shared a lot, and that was probably way more than the other person has ever heard. And are they going to love me, accept me, or are they going to reject me and abandon me? Like, I woke up the next morning after having this whole big experience with my boyfriend, and I was like, oh my God, that was too much. And I was like kind of freaking out. I had that vulnerability hangover. And I forgot to celebrate my vulnerability. I forgot to say, like, good job, girl. Like, that was so scary and so brave. And you courageously stepped forward. And it might have sounded messy. Maybe I would have even said it differently the next time or whatever. Who cares? I spoke up. I was brave. Denise, Charlene, Juanita, Amy, you're like, yes, girl. 3, vulnerability hangover. When you pause to celebrate your vulnerability, you can help yourself with not experiencing the vulnerability hangover. When you can celebrate it, acknowledge that was really hard and you were really strong in that moment, then it's just like, yeah, way to go. Way to go, me. It was an awesome moment. And when we think about all of this, really embracing our vulnerability, leading us to these deeper kinds of connections and relationships and intimacy. Brene Brown says we are only able to cultivate intimacy when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Vulnerability is scary. It is. There's no way around that. Like it even as much practice as I have in this, the more you kind of like allow yourself to be seen, the more you give yourself permission to really truly be you, it's scary every time. Now you gain courage, you gain confidence every time you do it, and you go, well, I survived that one. I'm not dead. I survived. But the amazing thing about vulnerability is that it truly opens you up to have true connection. It really is beautiful. Like, it really is beautiful when you can allow yourself to be seen. Your lovability is not on the line. And that the truest, quickest way towards with people is by being vulnerable. That kind of connection, when we can facilitate that through our vulnerability, that kind of connection can heal the world. It creates amazing kinds of community. It really heals so many different things. When we keep everything buried and stuffed and pretend that we are Superwoman and have it all together, that creates distance and separation. Allowing our mess to be seen appropriately on those levels creates connection, creates that intimacy. So I really hope that you understand why it's important more, kind of start to understand the mind behind why we resist it and how we can begin to shift that interpretation of rejection. And then ultimately really giving ourselves permission to embrace it, slowly tiptoeing our way in, baby stepping our way in, but ultimately stepping forward into more courageous vulnerability. So guys, thank you so much for exploring this with me, for being on the show today, for your generous comments and your likes and your hearts. So there's still time to share this. If this was helpful for you, you can still click the share button, share this off to your friends and family and acquaintances. And I will see you guys next week on our show. And as I always sign off, to remember, the purpose of life is to be grateful, to be great, and to be full. All right, guys, I will see y'all